Hello, everyone, and a very, very happy Monday to you today. Hope everyone is doing well. I hope you're all having a great start to your week. My name is Sarah, and I am absolutely delighted to be here with you on this Altenew Live this evening. Evening my time, but could be any part of the day for you. And I'm just very, very happy that folks are joining us. So, welcome, welcome. It is wonderful to have everyone here. And I'm looking forward to a lot of stamping fun with you all this evening. So, a big welcome. Hello. Hi, Cece. Great to see you. I see that Han has popped in. Ziamara, great to see you. It's always wonderful to see the folks that I look forward to seeing every time I do a live, and always great to be on the lookout for some new people too. So today I have a couple of demos for you using three new to me stamps and coordinating cutting dies. So we'll take a look at those, and I'll share what they look like, talk a little bit about them, give you a bit of an overview, and then I'll flash through some cards really quickly and we can get into the demos. Hi, Nancy and Cynthia. Cynthia says aloha. I see Serena is here. Han is the magic behind the Altenew badge this evening. So thank you, Han, for being here with us. And we'll probably get the reminder, hopefully, that if you share tonight's live while we are live, you can be in for a $15 gift certificate to the Altenew store. And I was on the Altenew website earlier, just like an hour ago, double checking something. And what do you know? There's like 5 new things that I'm like, oh, I want that. I want that. I want that. So forewarned is forearmed, I suppose. But go at your own risk if you're looking at the Altenew website. If you're like me, you will find 50 things that you absolutely need to have. So for tonight's live, I'm going to be using 3 new stamps and 3 new coordinating cutting dies. So these are new to me. I'm going to flash through the stamps and you can see these. I know that there's a bit of a glare on here. We'll take a closer look at each of these, but these are the 3 stamps. And then we'll see how I can see if I can balance this. Here are the coordinating dies. So I've got the Nostalgic Memories mini stamp and die collection in my hand. Really wonderful collection of florals. So I'm going to start with, well, I'll just go through each of them so that you can see the designs. So this is the mini magnolia. Again, I know there's a bit of a glare on here, but you can see in proportion to my hand, the size of these. Great for tags, great for scrapbooking corners and clusters and borders. Perfect for card focals, whether you use just a single one or create a grouping of them. So as you can see with this one, you've got this nice magnolia. You've also got 2 little words on here. You've got a teeny tiny just, and then you have because. Then we've got the mini white splendor. I have to be careful about pronouncing this. Anemone. I always struggle with this one. So this is a beautiful open floral. Now, this is what I tend to think of as like kind of a, I don't want to say a basic flower, but it's like if I need a flower on a stamp, this is a great one to go for. So you've got the floral, you've got the leaf cluster on here, and then 2 little tiny sentiments. You've got just a note, ... and then XOXO. And then speaking of tricky to pronounce, the mini, it can either be Gerbera or Gerbera. So I've heard it pronounced both ways. The more I think about it, the more I trip over it. I might just call it a daisy and let it go with that. I think probably somebody out there knows exactly the right pronunciation of this, but I had to Google it and I came up with a couple of different options and I thought, oh, that's not helpful. So again, nice big floral image. You've got the leaf and you've also got sentiments. It says you matter and then congrats on here too. So the 3 stamps, and then of course we've got our coordinating dies. So to go along. So for example, here's that magnolia. I tend to think of these types of stamps, the kind that you can stamp, you can heat emboss if you want to, but you can also just stamp it, color it in, and you've got a beautiful image ready to use on a card or a gift tag, wrapping paper. You could do so many different things with a really nice, simple, classic floral outline. Now, also looking at the two of these together, so you can get the whole collection, of course, but you can also get just get them by the twosies, I guess you'd call it. I have a lot of crafters in my family on my, birthday gift list, Christmas wish list, and I think two of these together would be a really nice. I know it's too early to think about Christmas, but stocking stuffer or birthday gift or just a little surprise for someone because they are so easy to use, so versatile. And the other thing, of course, with the outline stamps is you've got loads of possibilities for coloring in. And I like these especially for folks who are maybe new to stamping. Remember when we all first started stamping, getting on our various stamping journeys, and you bought your stamp or you got a stamp somewhere, and then it was like, now what do I do with it? So to be able to color these in with colored pencils, you could, of course, use markers, you can use paints, you can do lots of different things. So that's what we're going to be doing this evening. So I figured what I would do is share with you a couple of coloring techniques. And so we'll do some painting in with our dye-based inks. I'll show that to you. Last time I did a live, someone, I can't remember who it was saying, oh, I would like to do some more with my artist markers. And I was like, I'll remember artist markers for next time. So we'll do some very simple artist markering techniques. Also, I'm going to go back to one of my favorites, which is the water brush marker set. So then we're going to get a bolder effect this way. And then just because I got going stamping with these, I think it's also important to remember that with outline stamps, you don't even have to color them in to get a really striking card focal. So whether you are in a hurry, you're new, you want something simple and easy to do, I think these stamps really fit the bill. So I'm going to get going with our minis today. And let's see, I'm going to turn down my camera here and we can get started. So hello to everybody who has just joined. I wasn't able to really read all of the comments as I was going through all of the stamps. So I do say a big welcome to everybody who is joining us. Just really, really glad that you're here. All righty. So I think I've got myself all sorted here. Okay, so let's start with our first card here. Now, this is a really simple painting in technique that's great for using your dye-based inks. So I'm going to move aside my water brush markers here. That's another thing that we'll use, but a bit later. And I'm using two, as you can tell, a little bit old ink pads. I think this is like the original packaging. This is frayed leaf. And then for this, I'm going to use it as my palette. And I'm also going to be using it to protect my work surface. So this is the stamp that I'm using. Again, I have to be careful on the pronunciation. Anemone. Oh, doesn't trip off my tongue, unfortunately. So I'm going to be using these two together. And as you can see with the flower, if you angle it just slightly differently, you're able to create a really nice cluster that doesn't have a repetitive look to it. So you just need to die cut them and angle them slightly differently. Now, one thing I like to do when I'm using a watery medium, like I'm going to add some water to the dye-based ink, is to do some embossing. So I've stamped my flowers with black ink, and then I've heat embossed it with clear embossing powder. And that's going to create a resist effect around those edges and also help my color to stay in. So let's take a look at this. Bring in my Misty here. And I'm going to be working on just some sturdy white cardstock. Nothing really fancy, but something that isn't too wispy. It will take the watery effect. I'm just going to take my flower here and pop this down and get my magnets in place. And I've got my got my clear. I had to reuse the jar, a different jar, because I had an embossing powder accident. One day I'll tell that sad tale, but you can imagine what can happen with clear embossing powder going everywhere. So I've got my clear embossing powder and I've got my obsidian pigment ink. Now, I think if you've ever seen a live that I've done, you know that I love this ink pad and use it a ton because it's just a great basic black ink pad. Because it is a pigment ink, it also works as an embossing ink pad. So when I ink this up and stamp this down, then I've got my stamped image really nicely done. And I'm going to quickly take this out. I'm going to set that aside. Get my piece of scrap paper here. And then I'm just going to sprinkle on my clear embossing powder. So this is going to give me the look of that crisp black ink. But when I heat set this, this will become a resist effect, which means that I don't have to worry about any of the ink smearing or any issues happening with that. So let me funnel this back into my jar here. Top that off. And I've, voila, already got one heat set. So you don't even have to listen to my embossing tool droning on. So I've got my flower and I've got my leaf stamped in black and clear embossed. So I think especially around here, you can see the shine on there. Now I can get to painting. So again, using my craft mat as my palette, I've got my coral berry and I've got my frayed leaf. Now in this case, you do not want to be using a pigment ink because this doesn't react with water in the way that our dye-based inks are meant to. And for this, I'm going to use my water brush. Now with the water brush, they're meant to untwist on the barrel where you can fill the barrel with water, but I don't tend to do that. I use these just as paint brushes, basically. So I've got a jar of water here, and I'm just going to take my coral berry and just squash it onto my craft mat. And then I'm going to take my brush and just add a little bit of water to that. And the more water I add, of course, the more diluted the color will be. So I can experiment with that. If I want it really light, a light color, then of course I can add more water or keep it darker or do layers, lots of different options there. So it does enable you to also get some nice shades from your different colored inks. And honestly, once I realized I could do this with my dye-based ink pads, it really gave like a second word ink pads that I have that we tend to have because they're beautiful. They're such nice colors. And sometimes it's just nice to use them for something a little bit different. So this is all I have to do. Now, because I've got this raised embossed edge, if I just go over everything like this, just scribble this color, this watery medium on, nothing is going to smear or blur because I've got my embossing resist on there. Okay, it's a nice way to get the double the duty from your dye-based inks. Come around here. You can do a really sketchy loose coloring or go really precise. Okay, now for the center of my flower here, I wanted something a little darker, and I realized I have a couple different colors of the Altenew ink sprays. I've had them for ages and ages, and they apparently never I don't know, get used all the way up. It's like I opened the bottle and it's like I've got basically the whole bottle left, even though I've used these quite a lot. So they've got a bit of a metallic shimmer to them. You're supposed to, of course, uncap this and mist things. I don't tend to use it that way. I really like to use these also to paint in and to do some spattering. I'll show you that. So I've just got a bit of the color on my craft mat. And let's see, I'm going to dampen this off. And then I'm just going to come in here in the center and add a little bit of a darker center in there. So that's all I'm doing with this for now. We'll use it a little bit later too. And then I've got a painted flower ready to go. Tracy is asking, you could probably paint with the shimmer spray. Absolutely. You could paint the whole thing with the shimmer spray if you wanted to. Definitely. So for my leaf, I'm going to use the frayed leaf, and same process as before. Just squash down that ink pad, pick up a little bit of watery medium, and paint this in. Now, the only thing you do want to be sure is that you're using a cardstock that is not too textured. Sometimes watercolor cardstock it can have like a texture to it. You want a fairly smooth cardstock for this because we've got some fine lines on here. But you do want something that will take on a watery medium without buckling and warping. So then there you go. Roxy is saying that's why you have so much spray left, is because you paint with it instead of spraying it. That's true. I use these for spraying occasionally, but I have to say I really like having the option of doing other things with it too. Also because when I spray, I tend to like have a box that I need to get set up and things like that. So there is a little bit more setup time, I suppose, or setup effort when I'm spraying. I have a small crafting area, and if I'm not careful, I'm going to end up spraying the wall or something, or both of the walls. I want to be sure that I take care with that. So I have a cardboard box that I use for spraying, and that kind of protects things a little bit. So this is the first option with stamping and coloring in with our various floral elements. And of course, you could do this with any of the open floral stamps that we have. Now this background here, let's talk about this too. So the background is the honeycomb stencil. This is one that I really like because it is such a great background, especially for florals. So a couple of tips with this one. What I recommend is that when you're working with a stencil that has such fine lines, fine elements on here, and you can see it's really quite thin here, you do want to take care, especially if you're going to do a large surface area, you do want to take care that you secure this down in place so it's not sliding around. I know some folks like to use like a repositionable spray on here, and that will help it to stick all in place. I generally tend to use just some masking tape, or if you've got stencil tape or painter's tape, you can use stuff like that as well. Just makes it a little bit more secure. Very often with stencils, I'm kind of like, oh, I'll just hold it in place with my hand and I'm sure it'll be fine. But with this one, I wanted to be a little bit more sure. I'm going to pop this down, make sure that it's fairly flat here. And in this case, I'm using my frayed leaf to create the background. And I'm going to use one of the big blending brushes. So I've got my large blender. I also find that with stencils like this, if you're using a small brush, it tends to take a really long time because you've got a lot of open area in here. So rather than take a lot of time, I'm going to use a bigger brush so that I can cover more area on here. So this is my green brush. I use it for all of my greens. And then I'm going to come in and just work in a circular motion You can vary the pressure that you're using if you want to. That's kind of what I did with my finished card. Hold this down and work around. This is a great geometric background to go with floral stamps. So florals and geometrics go together really well. This is true in home decor, especially if you ever look at like bedding sets, sheets, and duvets and things like that. Stripes and florals, checks and florals, dots and florals. And I would also add honeycomb and florals. Go together really nicely too. I'm gonna gently pull this off and we can see the results. So really nice, simple, and easy to do. Oh, Bo is saying you want to try out the blending brushes that are round. These ones right here, these are great. I've got a couple of these and those are my go-tos. I got some for my mom as well. She has some problems with her hands, a bit of arthritis in her hands, and she says that holding these is a lot easier than holding something with a smaller handle. So something else to consider there. So this is the background and then my focal elements on my card. So again, I've just simply die cut the three of the leaf clusters as well, just angling things around so that they all look like they're going different directions. I've covered my card front with that stenciling. Here's the just a note. This is popped up on a bit of foam tape. And then I also have some sequins. These are the satin gold sequins that I've glued just around up here and down here. Now, a little trick when you glue your sequins down. So I use a liquid adhesive, just a plain white glue, and I'll glue them down. And then after I've glued them in place, I take a clear acrylic block and then I set it on top and kind of gently press. So sometimes the stencils, or the sequins, they'll kind of tilt off to one side and be a little bit uneven. By putting the block on top, it will help to keep everything flat and it keeps them in place while the glue is drying so they're not sliding around. So an extra little tip on there might be helpful for you. So that is our first card project. So let's move on to the second one that I want to show you, which is using our artist markers. Okay, so I'm going to move aside this, and this is using the mini magnolia. So here's the stamp and the die together. Let's see, Roxy, do you ever have a problem with the block sticking to the paper with glue seepage? No, I use a toothpick to apply the glue. So I'm really stingy with the glue because I have had that issue before, Roxy. So thank you for the question. Yeah, liquid glue can go places you don't want it to. Okay, so to our card here, what I've got going on is two of the mini magnolias, and I've stamped and heat embossed these, but I did them not with black and clear, but can you guess, since you can't actually see this very well, it's with our classic ink pad. I know this ink pad looks dreadful. It is used all the time and it shows it. So it's well loved. So I've used the clear embossing ink and the pure white embossing powder. So these two together, and I've already done the heat setting, is going to give me, I can't even get this to show at all. You'll be able to see it once I get to coloring. And then I'm using my artist markers to color this in. So let's see, move some things out of the way here. And I do really find, especially in this case, to keep the die package on hand so that you can kind of follow the color formation, especially around that little stem area there. So the artist markers that I'm working with, I've got 4. I've got a light pink and a darker pink, and then I've got a light green and a darker green. And the light pink is coral berry. That's the first one I'm going to use. Then I'm going to do some highlighting with grapevine. I'm going to do the leaves with forest glades, and this is evergreen. So if you're new to the artist markers, these are an alcohol-based marker. They've got two tips. So the one with the gray band on here is always going to be your fine tip. Let's make sure on here. So your fine tip is going to be like this. And then the other side is going to be a thicker tip. So you've got a couple of different options there. The artist markers I've found are just excellent, excellent quality. I've had a couple of different types of alcohol markers. I love these. These I've also had for a bajillion years, and they seem to be lasting me for a really long time. So good quality and longevity. Okay, now while this is out here, I'm going to kind of angle it again so that I can follow along here. Let's see. I'm going to tilt this so I know what I'm coloring. I'm going to come in here and start coloring in the leaves. Now I've stamped and heat embossed this onto a sturdy piece of white cardstock. I think you can see where this is coming up. Sue, no, regular cardstock, it's a pretty sturdy weight cardstock. It's not watercolor paper, but it is definitely sturdier cardstock. The kind that I get is called mixed media cardstock, and I just pick it up at my local craft store. With alcohol markers, you do want to have something that is sturdy, just like the other cardstock that I showed you before, just because you want something that's going to withstand whatever you're adding to it. Okay. Now I'm just following the lines here. I'm angling this a little bit because it's hard for me to see, as well as probably you too. So I'm going to be coloring along here, and then we'll show you my progress as I get around this petal. And I'm using the wider tip for right now. So you can see how this is coming along here. And the artist markers are, of course, available in loads of different colors. They come in different sets. So if you're the kind of person who likes to have a nice full set of markers, they come in lots of different combinations. A really good value, though, which I tend to think is just all to new. Lots of good value. Okay, and I'm coming along here. I've got some leaf images here that I'm going to come back and color as well. But first I want to make sure I get these petals down. And I'm just going along the edges. I'm not going over the embossing. I'm trying to kind of go along so that I still get that white showing through. Okay. And let's see, trying to make sure that it doesn't keep inching closer to me. There's something about coloring that's like really soothing. I'm going to find myself very relaxed here today, I suppose. No, I'm at the end of my day here in Germany. Okay, now come along here in the center. And I'm going to use the grapevine pen to do some accenting. And let's see, this is also the petal. And then I've got two leaves. I've got one here and I've got one there. So these are petals too. And for the card, the finished card, I did this process twice. So I stamped and embossed two of the flowers. And like I did with the previous card, just angled things around. so that they look different. And this is also part of the flower. Okay. And here we go. Just about done with this. And then I can move on to my leaves. And I can do some accenting on here too. All right, so voila, there is the flower. So make sure that I get the cap back on here so that nothing dries out. And then I'm going to go to the leaves and the stem. And this time I'm using the lighter of my two colors, and this is the Forest Glades. So let's come back in here. And color with our green. And this will help those leaves to appear. So now we can really start to see our image. And you can simply color with the artist marker and then like leave it as is, or you can also do some really nice shading, add in some other colors if you want to. So you can go simple, or you can be a bit more technique oriented if you want to. Either way is fine. And it really comes together when you start to see the leaves. Okay. And there we go. Oops. Okay, so this is, I got this all turned around here. This is our flower, our mini magnolia, colored with the artist markers. Now you could leave this as is. I added a little bit more by going in with the darker colors. So starting with the flowers themselves. So I was working with the coral berry, and then I came in with the grapevine. Now in this case, I'm going to use the fine tip of the pen. And I wanted to add a little bit of color here, just in the center. So just a little touch on here. And then also in some of these other areas too. So some of the areas that you can see on the package where things would, like the petals would be sort of shaded. Kind of follow that. And then I went along the edges of some of the leaf or the flower petal centers. And you can do this to the right, to the left, it doesn't really matter. Just kind of creating a bit of contrast. So that you can see it's got a little bit more definition on there. Now, if you want to, you can then come back again with your lighter color. And again, this is the coral berry. And sort of finesse those shaded areas, just coming in and coloring over again with a lighter color, the darker colors, and it will make it so that your lines are not quite so stripy, and you've got a little bit more layering of the color on there. So you can sort of layer up your colors even if you're working with an alcohol-based marker. We tend to think of layering up colors with paint, for example, but you can do it with your markers too. And I have to say, I am not a coloring expert. You know, there are some people that just do amazing things with alcohol markers and alcohol inks. I am not that person. But these markers make it really easy for me to feel like I am that person, which I appreciate. Okay, so again, here is the flower, this time with a little bit more definition on here. And then I did the same thing on the leaves, and this time this is with evergreen. So this I wasn't too wild with. I just added a little bit on here and along these areas, and then went back with my lighter green and just blended that out a bit. So it's just not quite so stark. But it does give a little bit of definition. So there we have our colors. So you're asking the darker color. I'll read off the colors to you again so that you can see. So for the flower, I'm using Coral Berry. That's my base color, my lighter color. And then I have Grapevine, which is what I was using to highlight. I went back and blended again with the Coral Berry. For the leaves, I colored in, this is Forest Glades. And then I used Evergreen for a little bit of shading on there. And yes, Roxy, the heat embossing does prevent bleeding as well. Yeah, so it really does. The heat embossing is kind of like my go-to because I just find that it prevents things from getting a little bit too messy. So then once I did this twice, and you can see it really didn't take too terribly long. I actually found it quite soothing, quite relaxing to do. And I did two of them, popped them up on foam tape. Now, I've also got some of this gold embroidery thread on here because I was playing around with the elements and it just needed a little bit of softness. So this is the antique gold embroidery thread. And what I'll do is I'll put these two together, kind of secure them together, put the foam tape on the back, and then I create this sort of swirl, no other description for it, like a little bird's nest. Let me move these over. Like a little bird's nest with just a looping of the embroidery thread. And then I tack that down on my background, and then I put my stamped images on top so that everything is like held down together. But you can kind of play with the loops and everything around here so that you've got the effect that you want. Now, also for my background on here, I've got, guess what? My old friend, the Puffy Heart Metallic Shimmer spray, but not sprayed, spattered. So let me grab a piece of cardstock here. I'm gonna move these out of the way so that nothing inadvertently gets spattered. Shake it until the rattling ball or the mixing ball in there starts to rattle. And then, so normally in real life, you would take off this top cap and spray with the nozzle on here. But what I like to do is just take this out, hold it over my cardstock, and then just tap this. This will give me bigger blobs, spatters, than if I were giving a fine sheen or a fine misting on there. But it does add really quickly, and then I will have a little bit of shimmer on there as well. So that's what I've done on the background of my card. I'm going to put this way over here so I don't put my hand in it. And then I stamped the just because and just cut this out, kind of made it so that there's a bit of foam tape under here. It's got a bit of a wave. And then I've got some more of those gold sequins on here too. I'm going to mop this up so that I don't get puffy heart everywhere. This is the beauty of the craft mat, is that you can just clean it up as well as using it as a palette. And then we can move on to another card. So we've done 3 coloring techniques, or we've got 3 coloring techniques. We've done 2 so far. And the next one that I want to show you is a favorite of mine, an old favorite of mine, and that is the water brush markers. So let me unearth these from my pile here. I use these a lot because, like so many of my Altenew things, they're just a classic in my stamping stash. I really find that they're great for coloring. They're also great for doing backgrounds and stencils and things like that as well. So in this one, this is the Tropical Fiesta set. In this one, you've got everything from purple wine, which I've used, through crimson, sun-kissed. You've got some nice leaf colors in here, sweet leaf and lime. And then it goes to darker shades like Desert Night, Paper Bag, and Lava Rock, which is a nice dark gray. This technique will work for any of the color combinations. They've got lots of them. And what I've done here is stamped and embossed my Gerbera, depends on who you ask. And I've stamped this with my obsidian black and then used my clear embossing powder. Heat set that, and again, I've got my raised elements on here, and I can color from there. Now, in this case, I stamped and embossed this onto watercolor cardstock, and that's because this is a nice water-based medium, and it really does require a nice sturdy cardstock to work with it so that it doesn't get warped. So I'm using here, I've got fresh lemon. I used purple wine, and for the leaves, I used lime. So I like to, with getting a variety of colors onto one flower like this, so you have some options. I should back up. You can simply color the flower with one color. You can also, while it's still wet or even after it dries, work in a second color so that you can get a variety of shades and tones in here. But let's talk about how these work. So the barrel of this is filled with your watercolor medium, and all you do is simply color it in. It's got a nice fine tip. You can also kind of get a broad wash of color. So it's really nice versatility here. Perfect for just painting in. And again, because I've got my raised embossed edges, I don't have to worry. I mean, I can go over everything. I could scribble in to do a nice base color, which you can definitely do. You can scribble all you want. I'm just kind of popping in some color here because I know I want to add that purple wine on top. Now, when I'm doing this, when I'm coloring this, I'm not squeezing the barrel of the water brush marker because then it will bloop, flood all over the place. So you don't need to add pressure to it. Okay, so I've got some basic color in here. Now what I can do is come in with my purple wine and add more color right on top. I can also put some of my purple wine on my craft mat and use my water brush marker and dilute the color and add some of this on top. So again, you've got control over your colors and how much intensity of color you want. So it really allows you to get, more shades than just the one. So I'm just going to come in here again and work in some of this color. Then if I decided, no, actually I quite like having a darker shade, you can still work in this while it's wet. You do want to make sure that you don't over flood things because even though you've got that raised embossed edge, you know, too much water is too much water and it'll kind of go lots of places. So you do want to make sure that you're not over flooding things. Okay, so I'm just going to finish these. We can always come back to it as well. And if you think, you know what, that's maybe a bit dark, you can also come in with your baby wipe and tap off some of that color. You can get a lighter look. And then if you're like, ooh, no, change my mind again, that's fine too. You can always come back and add more. This is the beauty of water-based mediums, is that they're pretty forgiving. I kind of like how that's bleeding out. So that's the flower. Let's take a look at the leaf. For this, I'm just using lime, which is one of my favorite colors, and just painting this in. But you can see how, whoops, you can see how you don't need to squeeze. You can see how the fine tip of the water brush marker is really allowing me to get into the detail areas here. Okay. And then I just need to let things dry. What happens if I come in and tap this out a bit more? That also looks nice. So I can do some working and reworking with this as much as I want to. And it allows me to really custom create things. Now I have to say too, when you're doing multiples of flowers, don't worry if they're not all exactly the same, because if you've ever seen a bouquet of flowers or a bunch of flowers growing together, they all look slightly different, which is wonderful. So that's what I've done here is I just stamped and embossed a bunch of them and went to town with the same two colors, but allowing for some variation in there. Okay, I'm going to mop this up, and then let's talk about the background on here. So my background is, let's see, is another stencil, and this is the beach towel stripes stencil. Also one of my favorite stencils because it's just a great classic design. You cannot go wrong with stripes. So it's got some wide areas, it's got some narrower stripes, and I wanted to get this kind of, I don't know, kind of a watercolory effect on here. And so I was doing a reverse stenciling process. So let me show you this. For this, I'm going to, let's see, I've got my cardstock here. I'm going to just bring in a stack of scrap paper and pop my stencil down. And I'm using the lime for this. This is again the water brush marker. And I'm going to scribble on my color, not through the stencil, but on the stencil. So I want to get my medium, my watery medium on the stencil itself. This is why I've got it on a stack of scrap paper, so it doesn't go absolutely everywhere. Now I want a watercolor look, so I'm not being really careful here. Got that done. Then I'm going to grab my water mister, give a couple of mists. I'm going to flip this over, pop this down. Got my cardstock in place. And just place this right down, clean hand, not an inky one. Okay, and then lift this up, and I've got a really cool watercolory stenciled effect. Now this is great if you want to have the look of a watercolor stripe without actually having to navigate through the stencil or to try and freehand it. So once I've done that, and I've got my flowers and my leaves on here, I can start putting things together. So in this case, I'm going to move this out of the way again. In this case, what I've done is just glued my striped paper onto the front of my card. And then I've got my 3 flowers here. I've got a couple of leaves, and the leaves are glued straight down, and then my flowers are up on some foam tape. So I've got some definition and dimension here. So these are layered up, and then this one is layered up on top. I have the little word congrats on here, and I've got some sequins as well. Now you may notice a bit of black spattering on here on the background. That's done very simply with my jet black dye ink. So again, not the obsidian because that's a pigment ink, the dye-based ink. Put it onto my craft mat. I'm going to take, this is the water brush I use only for spattering black because I do this a lot. So it's the blue one that I have. And then I'm just going to hold this up here and spatter across. So I'm going diagonally across my stripes. So I have some movement this way and movement this way. And then just let that dry. Again, mop this up. Mop it up, Sarah. And then let that dry, and then I've got a nice, interesting background. So yeah, the background is super simple. The stripes remind Carol of birch trees. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I love that you can get, where's that stencil? This messy stencil. I love that you can get from this, if you're using a blending brush through it, you can get a really crisp, well-defined look. But if you use it with a different kind of medium, you can get something that is a lot looser and more watercolor inspired. So I'm all about versatility. So Altenew really does help me with this. So that is our, let's see, third card. So coloring so far, we've done our water brush markers, alcohol inks, and our dye-based. Now, as I mentioned, you can color, but you don't have to color. So the last card that I want to show you is this one here. And what I love about this is that you've got some soft color going on with the stencil background, but these flowers, and this goes for any of the 3 that I've showed you today, look beautiful just as black and white. Now these have been stamped with obsidian black and then clear embossed. So I do have a little bit of shine on there, which is nice. And then my background is the Flowing Drops stencil. I love this stencil. So this is one that also looks beautiful as a background, especially with florals. And for this one, where did it go? I also used my frayed leaf and my large blending brush. Let's see. I'm gonna risk it and not tack it down with my tape. So let's see. Keep your fingers crossed. Let's see if I can get this. I'm gonna hold it down in some areas and just gently circular motion come around and keep this in place and stencil this. This is a design also that looks great if you are stenciling just one color, but if you want a multicolored background, you could do one color in the center. You could do a second color, go tone on tone if you want lights and darks, or you could do kind of a rainbow effect, also would look really cool. Okay, I'm pushing my luck here without having it tacked down. So let's see how we go. So there you can see, just a really simple, beautiful design. Super easy to do. Sue, you have this one too. It's one of your favorites. Yeah, it's just, you know, we have our favorites. This is one of mine as well. It just makes a beautiful, simple background. And it's not so overwhelming that you can't stamp a sentiment right on top. Now, the sentiment that I stamped here is not from one of the 3 sets that we worked with today. This is from my well-loved Sentiments and Quotes stamp set. Maybe I need to put it in another storage bag of some sort. These are used and loved, and they're just probably one of my all-time favorites. And so the stamp that I'm using is this one, Your Kindness Makes Such a Difference, which I just think is a wonderful alternative to thank you, which a thank you sentiment is great. But your kindness makes such a difference really does add an extra, um, yeah, an extra level of gratitude, I think, to a thank you card. So that is one of my favorites. And this one just has lots of beautiful and very useful sentiments for the inside and the outside of your card. So you've got some versatility there too. So that is our final card for the day today. So we've got four. We started with the same flowers that we ended up with. So you're able to see that you can get so many different effects just depending on the coloring medium that you are working with. So let's see if I can get these in the right place. Here is our mini magnolia. I've got the mini gerbera. I'll figure that out one of these days. The anemone. This is really a test for me today. And that one goes on either one of these. So our three fantastic sets today in the Nostalgic Memories mini stamp and die collection. And then, of course, we were working with our artist markers, with our die-based ink pads. We've got our clear embossing, white embossing, my all-time favorite, the ink spray that I will have for the rest of my life, because no matter how much I use it, I always have plenty left over, which is also a wonderful thing too. So I'm going to switch us back up again so that I can say another nice thank you to everybody for joining us today. I really do appreciate it. Han, thank you so much for adding in all of the links and keeping us up to date. I hope I didn't miss anything. Wonderful, wonderful to see everybody this evening. So thank you so much again for joining. And I hope I will get a chance to see you again. I think I'm back on early next month. We will have to see. So I'll look forward to seeing everyone then. And until then, take care. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day and a great start to your week. I will catch you again later. Good night, everybody.